I'm very honored and pleased to welcome even Mikloš here, and I will say a few words about him in a second. Just to outline the context of this event, it's a guest lecture of the Center for European Union Research at the Central European University, and the reason why we set up this event is that we wanted to have one of the key players in Euro crisis management back in 2010 to 2012 here, actually in the classroom, to tell us about his experience in that period. So the format, just to explain the format before I start saying more about our guest speaker, is that our guests will speak for about 40-50 minutes, and then we have a chance to gather questions and comments, and we make this an interactive debate. So I would like to invite everyone to participate, but also to respect the fact that maybe several of you are interested in taking part in the debate. The conversation here and also the lecture is streamed over the internet. If you want to watch it again, you will be able to do this later on. The video of the lecture itself will become available. Let me say now a few words about even Mikloš. She was the deputy prime minister of this country from 2010 to 2012 as the finance minister of Slovakia. He also served in that capacity also as a member of government before, between 1998 and 2002, if I'm not mistaken, in the early 1990s. And if I may say so, he also attached to a particular phase in domestic politics in Slovakia, which was a heated period, and first also, he will probably tell us about this, a lot of people were caught by surprise in the sense that the euro crisis kicked in, and that in this process a lot of domestic conflicts also erupted, and it's a very contemporary issue. We are now seeing again discussions about solidarity within the Eurozone, issues of financial aid. Just to alert you to the fact that by early 2010, the EU had pledged for the first time ever on the Eurozone financial aid to a Eurozone member country in order to counter the negative effects of the euro crisis, which in 2010 sort of turned into a sovereign debt crisis, at least in some euro area member states. Slovakia, and Mr. Mikloš will correct me if I'm wrong here, was one of the first countries actually opposing the first bailout package for Greece, actually refusing to take part in it. That shows some of the controversy, but later on, the Slovak government, as all the other governments of the euro area, supported the more permanent, first transitory and then permanent rescue mechanisms, the European Financial Stability Facility and the European Stability Mechanism. That all means, and that brings us to the discussion here, that a lot of politics around it in the sense that euro crisis decision-making was a difficult decision in the sense that countries have to level up quite a lot of financial resources for taking part in this program. Obviously, countries have different experiences with taking part in the Eurozone. And this is why we ask you to come here and to share your experiences. And I'm very glad that you accepted our invitation, and we're very much looking forward to this lecture. So thanks again for coming over to Budapest on this sort of snowy afternoon. The floor is yours. I'm very much looking forward to your lecture and the discussion.
Thank you very much. Do I have to speak to these microphones or? Yeah, okay. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. The topic of today's lecture and discussion is decision-making in context of the euro crisis, and I would like to speak about Slovakian experience mostly. But let me start with broader perspective about the Eurozone, the problems of the Eurozone and why this crisis began. What is the main reason for this? We all know, of course, that the Eurozone is a very special monetary union, very unique monetary union, which was created from 1999 as virtual currency and then from 2002 as full currency with the notes as well. And we also know that this is the only monetary union which doesn't have at the same time standard type of the fiscal union, which doesn't operate in one country but which operates in many countries at present it is 19 countries from the January this year. Lithuania entered as 19th member country. Slovakia entered in 2009, and Slovakia from January 1st, and Slovakia was 17th country. Or 16th, I think, yeah. What is the main problem? The main problem is that, of course, monetary union needs also fiscal union. And then here is the problem, because there are more types of fiscal union. There is not only one type of fiscal union. Of course, very well-known type is the United States of America, which means big federative country with 51 states, but with one fiscal authority. I mean, strong federal government, strong redistribution inside of this country. Of course, Eurozone is different in this regard, that we don't have this kind of strong federative system. We don't have United States of Europe. We still have very strong national states. We don't have redistribution, or we have only a very small, much weaker redistribution as in standard fiscal union. This question is key, because we still have monetary union, but we still don't have fiscal union. And of course, the main problem is that standard or typical fiscal union is impossible in Eurozone. Why? Like saying by another words, United States of Europe, like United States of America, is practically, in my opinion, impossible to implement. And the main reason for this is that we don't have strong enough common European identity to respect necessity of the strong federal government, strong redistribution, the strong common fiscal policy, tax policy, social policy, and so on and so on. Which makes question is, but I will return to this key question at the end of my lecture. But let's start speaking about this topic by saying that this was from the beginning the biggest and most sensitive, not only economic, I mean technical problem, but also political problem. The main economic problem connected with this is that for monetary union, it is not necessary to have countries or members of the monetary union which have the same or similar economic level, economic development. It is not necessary. But what is the problem if there is divergence in the competitiveness and in the economic development? And this is what happened. Inside of Eurozone, there was from the beginning, which means from 1999, or if you want from 2002, when Eurozone as monetary union started fully operate, there was divergent development in the economic performance, in the competitiveness. And the best way how to illustrate it is to show differences between between the strongest and one of the most competitive economy, German economy, and in comparison with weakest or one of the weakest and least competitive economy, which is of course Greece. What happened? I will show you just few figures which are illustrating, I think, very good what happened. Between 1999 and 2009, which means first 10 years of Eurozone, in Germany, real salary growth, real wage growth, was in whole economy in total, in reality it was not growth, it was minus 5.8%. In real terms, wages in Germany decreased by almost 6%. At the same time, real wage growth in Greece was plus 44.6%. If we look at what was the main source of this development in Greece, it was mostly public sector. Because in public sector, this figure 40 plus 45.6 is overall total real wage growth. But in public sector, in Greece, during 10 years, from 1999 to 2009, average wage growth was 76.7% during this 10 years period. In private sector, it was 34.1, and in total, it was 44.6, which means, at the same time, the competitiveness and productivity in the German economy was increased significantly, of course, because the wages decreased. But in Greece, it was completely the opposite direction development. It was not, of course, based, connected with the competitiveness, on the contrary. But at the same time, the risk of giving money, giving credit to Greece decreased significantly, which is, of course, strange, but it was true. It was mainly because euro. As you know, the risk of the country is marked or is measured by spreads, which means this difference for what is the price for credits for any country in comparison with Germany, because Germany is the best country with the lowest risk. And what were the spread? Before creation of the euro, Greece took credits by 10% more expensive as Germany, which means spread was 10%. Concretely in 95 it was 10.1%, which means the risk premium was much higher. But then in 99, when the euro was created, it was only 1.8%, and then in 2003, in the mid of this period, it was only 0.2%, which means in 2003, creditors consider Greece the same risk as Germany. At the same time, development in wages, in competitiveness was completely different. And this kind of development was during these years 2002, 2008. Then in 2008, as we know, global financial crisis hit, and then all economic development was much more complicated. And then in countries which were overheated, like Greece, but also Baltic countries, also US, of course, real estate bubbles. After boom, this terrible bust and recession came. This is what happened. And now, then after crisis, of course, spreads came up again, and in 2009, spread was 2% of the Greek bonds, 10 years bond, and then in 2010 it was 6.5%, and in end of 2010 and first half of 2011, spread were again more than 10%. It means the risk premium was much higher. Again, approximately the same as in mid-90s. This is what happened. Let me now very briefly explain what happened in Slovakia and in similar countries like Slovakia. It is, I think, important to know context, because main topic of my lecture and our discussion is then this management crisis, this decision-making during Eurozone crisis. In Slovakia, and at present we can say that the most successful transition countries are Baltic countries, Poland and Slovakia. These countries did a lot of structural reforms, and especially thanks to this, their convergence progress is the highest among all transition countries. Especially in comparison with Hungary, for instance, or Slovenia, they are much more successful. This is important to know, because this was also the reason why now these countries, except Poland, and Slovenia, but Slovenia historically had the highest development and entered Eurozone as first transition country. Slovenia entered Eurozone in January 1st, 2008. Then Slovakia was second one, which entered in January 1st, 2009. And then Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania last at the beginning of this year. Which means what is interesting, mostly we can say that these countries, which were the most successful in transition, were able also to enter European Union, Eurozone. The reason is that for fulfilling Maastricht criteria and criteria for entering Eurozone, it was much easier and it was important if countries did structural reforms, if they had fiscal consolidation, macroeconomic stability, then it was easier to have higher economic growth and to fulfill Maastricht criteria and other criteria to enter Eurozone. Slovakian example. Slovakia started as an independent country in January 1st, 1993, which means we are young country. After division of Czechoslovakia in January 1993, country was created. Then, at that time, our GDP per capita, our economic level was about 62% of Czech economy, Czech GDP per capita in PPP, which means less than 2/3. Then we came through very different and very difficult periods of the political and economic development from this 93. First period was very difficult. Slovakia was isolated. We had very strange, peculiar government of Mr. Mečiar, who isolated country politically, economically. Slovakia was excluded from the integration process, from the process of the entering European Union, from the entering NATO, from the entering OECD. And in 98, Slovakia was really on the edge of isolation and also big economic and political and economic isolation and macroeconomic imbalances, very corrupted system, and so on and so on. At that time, Madeleine Albright, who was then at that time Foreign Affairs Secretary, U.S. Foreign Affairs Secretary, named Slovakia Black Hole of Europe. Then it was political change. Dzurinda's government from 98 to 2006 were in power, and they completely changed the country. They catched up in integration. Our neighbors are Hungary, Poland, and Czech Republic, and we entered together in 2004 into the European Union, and then we entered also NATO. What is important from point of view of Euro is that, especially second Dzurinda's government, which was in power between 2002 and 2006, did a lot of deep, comprehensive structural reforms. At that time, Slovakian government was named by World Bank the most reformed government and most reformed country in the world. And especially in 2003, we prepared very comprehensive and complex package of structural reforms: tax reform, public finance reform, fiscal decentralization, pension reform, labor market reform, social system reform, and healthcare reform. And these reforms started to be implemented, to function from the January 1st, 2004. In 2004, in May, we entered together with other Visegrad 4 and Baltic countries and Slovenia, we entered also European Union. Because these reforms, Slovakia had the highest economic growth between 2000-2010, the highest economic growth among all EU countries. And if we look at the convergence, I think this will illustrate the best the effect of the reforms. If we are speaking about convergence, we are speaking about approaching the EU 15 level of average EU 15 level of GDP per capita, which means EU 15 are the most developed, rich Western European countries. If we look at these figures, and as I've mentioned, we prepared this. I was at that time Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, and Mikloš was Prime Minister of these two governments. We prepared all these reforms during year 2003, and they started to function from beginning of 2004. And if you look at the convergence progress during 4 years, from 2004 to 2008, then you can see figures. Hungary had the convergence progress, which means approaching the EU 15 average level, plus 2% during these 4 years. Czech Republic, plus 3%. Poland, plus 6%, and Slovakia, plus 14%. In 4 years, we jumped in the GDP per capita, in PPP, because we had very, very high economic growth thanks to these reforms. Why it is important also in comparison with Euro, but also with economic policy of the country. If you look, and I will now offer you another comparison of the same, but during longer period. If we look at the period 2003-2013, which means 10 years from now, approximately, average convergence progress of the Baltic countries, Slovakia and Poland, which means the most successful countries, is 21.4%. These countries, in average, during 10 years, approached the EU 15 level by 21.4%. But Hungary, at the same time, only 7%. and Slovenia, at the same time, only 3%. What is important? What is important conclusion from this? I mean, the most important conclusion is that countries which are providing deep structural reforms based on the economic freedom, on the liberal, if you want kind of economic policy, these countries are much more successful. As countries like Slovenia, which still have very strong public sector, which didn't do this kind of structural reforms, or Hungary, which also is going on the opposite direction, especially during last 5 years. It is direction of the state capitalism and strengthening the position of state in the economy and not the free market and free competition. What is the relation with Europe? These reforms and this successful economic development was necessary precondition for enter Eurozone. And we decided in Slovak government in 2003, this was the second Zurinda's government, that we want enter Eurozone as soon as possible. Then in 2005, we entered ERM2. ERM2 is kind of waiting room for the euro. And then there was election in Slovakia in 2006. We came to the opposition, new government, socialist government, center-left coalition ruled the country, and they finished the process, and Slovakia entered the Eurozone, as I said, from 2009. Without doing these reforms, without to have this successful economic development, very high economic growth, Slovakian economic growth in 2007 was 10.5%, which was a Chinese figure. Without doing these reforms, it couldn't be possible to fulfill at that time criteria for entering Eurozone. And now to tell you also something from informal information, when I was for the first time finance minister, it was 2002-2006. We have entered European Union at that time in 2004, and from 2003 I attend all meetings of the ECOFIN, finance ministers of the European Union, and also all other colleagues from the transition countries, from the new member countries entered. In informal talks, all of them said at the time that it could be good also for their countries if they are in the Eurozone, because we were at the process of the entering, but they said openly it is difficult to say that they are not in the waiting room, for instance, because they didn't fulfill at the time the criteria. It's much easier to say, even at that time, that we consider it is not that good for us. We think it is better to be out of the Eurozone and not yet. Maybe we will see later on. Of course, every of these new member countries is obliged to enter because it is commitment of the new member countries. Now about Greek crisis and the Eurozone crisis, which means Slovakia at that time, from 2009, entered Eurozone. It was the year of global financial crisis, as you know, 2009. 2009 was year when Slovak economy declined about 5%. And then in 2010, in April, the Greek government asked for help the Eurozone countries, and in May 2nd, Eurogroup agreed that yes, Eurozone will offer 80 billion euro loan to Greece, and then additional 30 billion was offered by IMF, International Monetary Fund. At that time, I was deputy chairman of the opposition party. I was the opposition members of the parliament in Slovakia. This socialist Fico's government ruled the country. Important is to say that first Fico's government, because now we have second Fico's government. First Fico's government between 2006 and 2010 was gained power by very sharp criticism of the reforms. He promised to cancel all these reforms which I have mentioned. Finally, when they gained power, they didn't do anything, almost anything. There were some really cosmetic changes in the tax system because we imposed flat tax, very well-known and famous flat tax system. He didn't change almost anything, and of course it was clever because economy was doing very well. It was very high, one of the highest economic growth. He had a lot of money in the state budget because growth, because tax collection and so on and so on. But then, when crisis hit in 2009, economy, as I have mentioned, came down, -5%, but Fico's government continued in the spending money like before. Which means, of course, the consequence was very high, one of the highest deficit of public finance in 2009 and 2010. It was more than 8% of GDP fiscal deficit. But he was still very popular because he still spent money like situation is no changed. At that time, during crisis, Slovakia had the highest growth of public expenditures among all EU 27 countries, despite Slovakia was not necessary to use any euro for saving banking system. We, in the first Zurinda's government, we restructured banking system and we privatized it to the strong Western banks, and the Slovakian banking sector at the time of crisis was very sound, and it was not necessary to do anything with this. Which means policy of the Fico's government was very populist in this regard, that he continued to spend a lot of money. In this situation, as I mentioned, in May 2010, there was this Greek crisis, and Greece asked for the loan, and Eurozone countries agreed to give 80 billion. We were at the opposition, as I have said, and in June, which means a month later, there were elections in Slovakia. In normal term, parliamentary elections after 4 years of the Fico's government. At that time, we said, I personally wrote article just a few days after this decision, and we rejected this. We sharply criticized this loan, and also the agreement of the Slovak government to participate on this loan. What was the main reason, main argument behind this? Firstly, and I'm still convinced that it was a mistake. That this first step was a mistake, and then all other steps were kind of natural consequences of this first mistake. Why it was a mistake? It was a mistake because, especially, maybe saying very quickly, because moral hazard. You know what is moral hazard in economy. Moral hazard is behavior in economy when some subject, doesn't matter if it is company, if it is physical person, or if it is country. If subject behavior is very, very risky, and then when this risky behavior is coming to the crisis, to the bad consequences, then the costs for this is paying by somebody else. Not by this person or subject who did it and who gained a lot of profit from this, but somebody else. This is normal standard definition of the moral hazard. And what happened in Greece was clear evidence of the moral hazard. At that time, we argued and we said, it was pre-election campaign in Slovakia, and we openly said, my party was the strongest party of Mikloš Zurinda. Mikloš Zurinda was chairman, I was deputy chairman, and our party was the strongest party in both of Zurinda's government between 1998 and 2006. And then at that time of Greek crisis, we were in the opposition 1 month before election, and we said openly, on behalf of our party, I said, we strongly disagree with this loan, and we think it is bad solution. And we criticized also Eurozone as whole, but also Fico's government that they agreed with this. Main reason, as I said, was moral hazard. And what we said that this is necessary solve and manage like another normal crisis situation, which was in history a lot of this kind of crisis. Argentina came through many times, but also many other countries. Even few months before, Hungary had, in 2008, the very, very difficult situation. Baltic countries had the same. Argument was, and in my opinion, it is very important also for the future that if somebody's behavior is very risky, is doing very huge money because of risky development, he has to take also risk for this, and he has to pay if this risk is then real. It is also very important for future, and who did this risky behavior? Of course, mainly it was a lot of mistakes. European Commission did mistake, rating agencies did mistake, but mainly there were Greek governments, more governments, not just one. Greek governments during 90s and after 2000, and banks, private banks, mostly private banks, which consider Greece no risky creditor and which gave them credits on the same risk premium like Germany. Which means what we said, the normal solution will be to have normal negotiations between creditors and debtors, and together with IMF. IMF, International Monetary Fund, is an institution which was created for this type of crisis. The main argument was, yes, but it is impossible because Greece is member of the Eurozone, and because Greece is a member of Eurozone, it cannot be devaluated. The currency of Greece cannot be devaluated, which is natural, which is true. And then, because devaluation is standard natural method for solving this kind of crisis. And in reality, Greece, before being the Eurozone country, came through a lot of devaluations because mismanagement, no reforms, and then macroeconomic crisis, imbalance, and then it was solved by devaluation. Of course, devaluation means that prices are going up, living of standard is going down, and then competitiveness is restored because country is poorer and export is cheaper. And here the argument was that this is impossible. But this is not true, because you can do not only external devaluation, which means the change of the currency rate, but you can do also internal devaluation. Internal devaluation, because external devaluation means that currency rate is depreciating or devaluated, and then as consequence of this, the wages are decreased and prices are increased. But you can do the same by so-called internal devaluation. Internal devaluation means that currency rate will sustain the same, but you will reduce salaries, and you will reduce also pensions and incomes. And this is not theory, because I don't know if you are familiar with the development in Latvia, but not only Latvia, all Baltic countries had very difficult situation during global financial crisis. And Latvia, I will show you it on the example of Latvia. Latvia was an economy which grew up very quickly from 2000 to 2007. In 2007, the economy was overheated. It was a lot of credits, a lot of credit boom, real estate boom. Situation like in Ireland or in other Baltic countries or in Spain. Then, global financial crisis hit in 2008. All these flows of the money, of the foreign money stopped and even reversed. And country was in real trouble, in the recession, in the bust. And then, in this situation, IMF, others said, and maybe I will start by two quotations because they are very illustrative. At that time, the Paul Krugman said, I have it somewhere here. He said, Latvia is another Argentina. It will go bankrupt in few months. It was in autumn 2008. Then, in September 2013, Mario Draghi said, Latvia is model for Europe. What happened between these two periods, between 2008 and 2013? And then Latvia entered Eurozone in January 1st, 2014. What happened? at that time. In 2008, I have mentioned to you the situation was really disaster, economic disaster. IMF came, and IMF suggested that it has to be the currency, Lat, I think Lat is Latvian currency, has to be sharply devaluated. But Latvian government rejected this. And it is important to add that Latvia from 2005 had the fixed level of their Lat to euro. Which means, in reality, formally, Latvia didn't have euro, but in reality they had euro. Because the currency rate was bound, was fixed to euro. And they rejected to change it. They rejected to devaluate Lat to euro. They rejected it because they were afraid that if they will do it, it will have three very bad consequences. The macroeconomic balance will be restored, but they were afraid from the public debt, because all public debt was denominated in euro. After devaluation, it could be increased. Second reason was for rejection was that they were afraid that if they do it, then there will be bankruptcy of the many of companies, industrial companies and other companies, and also bankruptcy of the banking sector. And they decided not to do it. They decided simply to do internal devaluation. What it meant, internal devaluation? It was provided huge, but really huge, fiscal adjustment. Fiscal adjustment in Latvia during only 1 year, 2009, was 9.5% of GDP. And during 3 years, 2008, 2010, it was 16% of GDP. It's a huge number, unbelievable number. How they reached it? They reduced public salaries by 26%. Reduced public salaries by 26%. Not to cancel 13th and 14th salary like in Greece, but cut by 26%. They cut even private salaries by 10%. They closed about half of state agencies, and they dismissed 29% of civil servants, which means really tough austerity measures. What was the consequence of this? Of course, if you will do this kind of reduction of domestic demand, it is even further decreasing GDP. And that's true. And it was reality. If you look at the figures, GDP in Latvia during 2008-2010 decreased by more than 20%. In 3 years, it was minus 20.3%. I mentioned to you that in Slovakia it was 5%, but only in 1 year. We had growth in 2008, in 2010, only recession was in 2009. In Latvia, during 3 years, minus 20.3%. But after doing this, from 2011 to 2013, Latvia is the highest growing economy in all European Union, and their economic growth during these 3 years, 2011, 12, and 13, is plus 14%. Debt to GDP increased in Latvia during that time but fortunately for them, they had very low level. Debt increased from 18.6% in 2008 to 46.8% in 2010, during this the most difficult period. And then from 2010 to 2013 decreased from 46.8% to 38%. Let's do comparison with Greece. In Greece, during these first three crisis years, economic GDP decreased by 10.2%, which means half of Latvia, 2008-2010. But then continued, and between 2011 and 2013, it was even almost 20% decrease of GDP in Greece. Which means during all this period, 2008-2013, Greece GDP decreased by almost 30%, which is much more than in Slovakia. And debt to GDP in Greece increased from 110% in 2008 to 175% in 2030. Why I'm speaking about this? Well, I'm speaking about this comparison of the Latvia and Greece. I'm speaking for illustrate that from the beginning it was not true that there is no other way like to give Greece loans and to push them to do reforms from outside. Because you know what is the most interesting difference between Latvia and development in Lithuania and Estonia was very similar. In Latvia it was the most severe, but it was similar. But what is a very important point, if we compare Baltic countries and Greece, is that in Baltic countries they did these very severe austerity measures, not because pressure from outside, on the contrary, because IMF suggested to devalue it. And they said, no, we will not. And devaluation is much easier politically. Because if you devaluate that, you can say, yeah, that's market. But if you reject devaluation and you cut the salaries by 26%, it is your decision. It is decision of the government. It is not decision of the market. You cannot say, this is not me, it is not us, this is the market. What is interesting? Which means it was stronger than pressure from outside. It was their internal decision that they will do it. And after doing this, not under pressure, but by their decision, governments which did it were really leftist, both in Latvia and in Estonia. I don't know if in Lithuania, I'm not sure now, but at least in Latvia and Estonia, governments which did these severe stabilization measures were re-elected. And if we look at the current situation in Greece, what we see? We see a situation in which there are changes, there are austerity measures, there are some cuts in the salaries, in the pensions, and so on and so on, but mostly not because their decision, not because decision of the Greek government, but mostly because pressure from outside, because pressure from Troika, from IMF, from World Bank, for IMF, ECB, and European Commission, and then the result is result of last election. Tsipras, with this kind of program which he had. Which means maybe the most important lesson from this is that reforms are successful, or one of the necessary preconditions of reform success is domestic ownership of reforms. There has to be leaders and political leadership. Political leaders has to be convinced that this is good, not because somebody is doing pressure for me from outside, but because I know that this is good, that this will help my country, this will solve the problem, and this will bring better future for the country. Now let me return to the euro crisis. But this, I think, was very important to also for you to understand why we rejected this first block. And of course, I know that it was much more complicated. I know that if at that time there was not this loan, that then many banks in Germany, in France, in UK were in trouble because they were the biggest creditors to Greek banks and Greek state and government as well. Yes, and that's true, that without this loan, maybe it was necessary at that time to have default and restructuring of the debt. And as a consequence of that restructuring at the time in Greece, many banks in Western Europe could be in serious troubles. But then I think it could be much, much better, more transparent, and more normal if countries and governments in these particular countries, like Germany, France, others countries, were decided, okay, our banks are in trouble, we have to save them, for instance, because they are too big to fail, and it could have the systemic risk for the whole economy. Then it could be much, much, much more just, and more transparent, and more normal. But what happened? Of course happened. We said, okay, we will not participate on this. We didn't know at the time, of course, what will be the result of elections, but then in June, we were successful, and we created government in June 2010 4 center-right parties created Slovakian government. Among them, the party of Mikloš that was again the strongest party in the 4 parties coalition. From these 4 members of the coalition, it was a lady, Iveta Radičová, became prime minister. I was again deputy prime minister and finance minister in this government. And we, 2 from 4 parties in this coalition rejected explicitly to participate on this law. My party, SDKU, Slovak Democratic Christian Union, and New Liberal Party, SAS, which means Freedom and Solidarity, Sloboda a Solidarita. And 2 other parties agreed with us. They didn't explicitly promise it, but they agreed with us. And then it started, of course, very difficult negotiations with the Eurozone countries. I remember my first Eurogroup was in July 2010, and I declared there that we will not participate on the program. It was very tough, I have to say. It was about 2-3 hours of grilling, pushing. Then Prime Minister Radičová came through the same process on the summit. And of course, it is understandable that for other countries who participated on this, it was unpleasant if one, even small country, reject this, because of course, in every country, it was politically very difficult to tell people that yes, we will offer a loan to the Greece, because we have to. But firstly, because we were convinced that it was not good decision. Secondly, because we said it explicitly, we did this promise that we will not accept this. And thirdly, because we were convinced that key by which it was divided, the sum, overall sum of the money, was unjust. It was pressure for us to change the position. We didn't do it. And finally, it was decided, okay, Slovakia will not participate, and this, Slovakia is very small. Our share on this by key, which we criticized as well, was 0.989%, which means 1%. This key of redistribution of the burden is done by key by the share of participation on the capital of the European Central Bank. Slovakia has almost 1% share on the capital of European Central Bank. Then we started to running the country, and then of course first loan was proceeding, and then EFSF, European Financial Stabilization Facility, was created, and then European Stabilization Mechanism was created. And these were decisions which, again, it was very sensitive. People were, in any country of the Eurozone, were against. It was very unpopular. But we, and as I'm saying now I'm saying about my party, about myself as finance minister, about Prime Minister Iveta Radičová was from my party, and Mikloš Zurinda, former Prime Minister, was Foreign Affairs Minister at this government. The main responsibility for explaining our partners, our position was on these 3 persons: Prime Minister, of course, Finance Minister, and Minister of Foreign Affairs. But then the chairman of this second party, Sloboda a Solidarita, Freedom and Solidarity, he decided, or he came to the conclusion that this will be his agenda, and he will be against any of the resolution mechanism, any of the loan, any of the participation for the helping, and then at that time not only Greece, but also, if you remember, Ireland, and then Spain, then Portugal. And they started to play this game that, no, we will against anything, we will not participate on anything, we will not give any euro or any cent for the Southern European countries, for these governments which were irresponsible, and so on, so on, so on. Our position was different. I mean, if I say now our position, I mean my party, but also 2 other parties in the coalition. We said okay, we did what we did, and it was correct that we rejected first loan, but now we have to participate. We have to be part of the club because we are members of the Eurozone. And of course, you can put a question, why? Why we were against the first loan, and why we didn't continue in this direction even later. Let me explain what was the reason. First one was that the process was triggered. It was this EFSF was created, and we couldn't change it, and we couldn't cancel it. Even at that time, if it was theoretically possible, it wasn't. It was even theoretically impossible. But even if it was theoretically possible, it couldn't be. In real terms, possible. This process was started. The EFSMS was created. ESM was under preparation. Second reason is that the rejection of the participation on the loan not cancelled the whole project, because it was not necessary to have unanimity there. It was just 1% of our participation was redistributed to all others. But EFSF and ESM were projects with unanimity. It was any country which rejected this means nothing, and no help and no crisis solution. Another reason was that EFSF and ESM, we can criticize them, but there were systemic solutions. Because ESM is very, very similar institution like IMF, like International Monetary Fund for the countries of the Eurozone. And of course, another reason was that in 2011, the situation was really, really difficult and dramatic. And it was not only a problem of the Greece, it was problem also at the time, as you know, of the Ireland and of the Portugal. One very important point, which is also differentiating the Greece and other countries, is on the theoretical level, everybody agreed that it is possible to recognize difference between insolvency and illiquidity. And everybody agreed that if country is only illiquid, which means in principle it is competitive economy, but has problem with the liquidity because the freezing of the financial market, then it is important and useful to help this country by this mechanism like ESM or EFSF or by loan. But if country is insolvent, then it is different type of problem. It is much deeper problem. Insolvency means not the shortage of money only because situation of the financial market, but it is shortage of the competitiveness because lack of structural reform, because mismanagement of the country, and so on, because bad economic policy which was provided in this country, and so on. And this kind of countries which are not illiquid but insolvent, they need restructuring of the debt. Then another reason why we agreed with EFSF and ESM was that we achieved change of key by which it was divided, by which was the share of countries created. This is something what was our achievement. Together with Estonia and other new small countries, we pushed for change of this distribution key. Why? Because this old distribution key was unjust for the small and poorer countries. This original distribution key was from the 50% by GDP per capita, which is okay, but from 50% by number of inhabitants. And it was not okay, because I can illustrate you on the comparison with Luxembourg, for instance, or with other highly developed countries, that we paid, finally, in relation to economic strength of our country, much, much more than much richer countries. And another important point is that the just system is if it is also related not to number of inhabitants, but to the volume of financial market. Because these mechanisms are finally about saving or protecting of the banks and financial sector. And if you look at these criteria, these poor and small countries, especially poor countries, new Eurozone member countries, paid in relative terms, in connection with the development, the level of development, much more than countries which were much richer. Which means we pushed for the change of this key, and it was achieved. It was also something that when I started, when I opened this question on the Eurogroup meetings, everybody said me, oh, it's impossible. It's impossible to achieve this change. Finally, it was possible. Which means what we achieved, we rejected the first Greek loan, and then we pushed and successfully pushed for change of the distribution key. Which means it was another difference between first Greek loan and then EFSF and ESM, where it was new distribution key. What then happened in Slovak government? And because finally this problem or this topic was the reason of failure of the government. In 2011, in October, it was voting of the parliament about increasing capacity of the EFSF, European Financial Stability Facility. It was necessary to increase capacity because crisis, because pressure, and it was necessary to pass it in every national parliament of every Eurozone country. At that time, in October 2011, all other 16 countries, Eurozone 16 countries, passed it in the parliament. Slovakia was the last one. The problem was that this second largest party in the Slovakian coalition, Freedom and Solidarity, they simply decided that this will be their political topic. They decided that they will be against any help, any assistance, and any participation of the Slovakia, because they considered it is very unpopular among people, and if they will reject this, they will be very popular. Leader of this party, his name is Richard Sulik, is still chairman of this party. Not it's strange, but he's now a member of the European Parliament. But he simply thought that this will be their agenda, and they expected that they will be the strongest center-right party by this, and they will be popular. Another problem was that Prime Minister at the time, Iveta Radičová, didn't manage this problem, this internal coalition problem, successfully. And I have to say that it was not good management, because she played a very strange role when she said something to Sulik, something different to us, and it was from this not very good result. Sulik and his people in the parliament, until final voting, they are saying that they thought that Prime Minister said them that she were not joining the voting for EFSF with the confidence to government. We were agreed in our party that she will do it. And it was my opinion that we have to do it. It was impossible to be member of the club, member of the Eurozone, and to say that we will not participate on any cost of our common solutions. We want to have advantages from this, but we will not participate on the costs. Politically, it was simply impossible. For the country, it was really very risky. From the future perspective, from normal relations, from the position of the country, and so on and so on. It was possible to, in some respect, to say no to Greek loan. It was possible to push for the change of distribution key, but it had some limits. But he decided to simply play this card. Then in October 2011, it was voting. Prime Minister decided to join voting about increasing capacity of the EFSF with the confidence voting, and the members of the parliament for this party voted against, which means against government, their own government. They were part of the government. They had, I think, 4 or 5 ministers in the government. All MPs, with one exception, if I remember correctly, voted for the fall of the government and against the EFSF increasing capacity. Then there were new elections in March 2012, and these elections, Fico, this socialist and populist, very strong socialist leader and socialist party, returned to the government, and now, from this 2012, he did such a good result that he created one-party government, first in Slovakian history, which is only consists from his party, from Smer party, which is socialist, populist party. Sulík's party, he thought that he will be leader of center-right parties, that his party will be stronger because this populist, I have to say not popular, but populist, irresponsible decision. Finally, he entered parliament, but only very, very closely, because we have threshold 5%, and if I remember correctly, he received 5.5 or like this, just a little bit over this threshold. Our party, which was the strongest center-right party in 2002, in 2006 elections, failed also. We received only 6 point something, which means we were second weakest party in the parliament. And Fico, as I have mentioned, we have now in parliament 4 or 5 center-right parties, small, all of them small, and one big, strong socialist party, which is ruling the country alone. And, of course, new parliament then agreed very quickly EFSF and then also ESM, which means finally we have also ESM, we have also EFSF. We agreed as country with this, but we failed our own government. And then, if we are speaking about Euro and about Eurozone crisis, finally, of course, what was the most effective method? Because EFSF and ESM was partially effective and tool for the solving the problem. But as you maybe remember, maybe not, in July or August, in summer 2012, Mario Draghi's position, very strong position, he said, as new ECB president, he said that he will do anything or everything for sustaining Euro. And this was the main or the most effective tool and signal for the markets that situation was then improved and stabilized until now, until latest Greek elections. Let me finalize by saying some few words about Greek election, about how I see the situation, and especially not only about Greek, but about what was also important, I didn't mention it, but it is very important. What we said at the beginning, when we criticized the first Greek loan, was that banks will not pay anything, and only payers will be taxpayers. But then it was changed. We pushed also, not only, if I'm saying we, I mean the countries like Germany, Finland, Netherlands, then Estonia, Slovakia. We had very similar opinions in the Eurogroup, and we pushed, for instance, for PSI, private sector involvement, which means also a solution where also creditors are paying, by cutting part of their payments. And PSI, private sector involvement, became part of the EFSF and ESM procedures. Now, today's situation. Firstly, I think that, and I will return what I said at the beginning. We have, of course, problem that we have monetary union and we still don't have fiscal union. I think what is unrealistic possibility is to build United States of Europe with strong federal government, with strong redistribution, with common taxes. It is simply impossible. Maybe technically we can imagine this, but we cannot imagine this politically. The main reason is that there is no, and it will be a long time from now, there will be no strong enough identity, European identity, for accepting this. Because for this, it would be necessary that, for instance, more competitive countries, Western European and Northern European countries will accept relatively big redistribution in direction to less competitive, many times also less responsible governments and countries. And then the question is, okay, and if not this kind of fiscal union, is there some another type of fiscal union which can work? I think yes, it is. And part of this is because banking union, as it was created with the common resolution fund and common banking supervision, is part of this solution. But another part has to be something what also was started by the six-pack and stability and growth pact, and there are rules, strict, enforceable, automatic rules, which will push every country to do responsible policy. To do responsible policy means to have sound public finance, to have low financial deficit and debt, and also to provide structural reforms. This is something what everybody is speaking about, and this latest changes in the Stability and Growth Pact, in the six-pack, they are going in this direction. The problem is, I think, that they are not sufficient enough, because it has to be really very strong, enforceable, and automatic. It cannot be the matter of negotiations, where the stronger, bigger countries have much better position and stronger position to negotiate changes, exceptions for them because that or that. But one matter which is still missing, and Greek elections showed it very clearly. What is missing is the mechanism for exit from Euro. And it has to be mechanism, it has to be. Without this, it is, I think, impossible to sustain. Because if I mean exit, I mean not only voluntary decision of the country that country decided that, okay, I don't want to be member of Eurozone, I am going out, but also mechanism for pushing country, for enforce country to leave Eurozone if country is not fulfilling these rules which I have mentioned. Because if you don't have this rule, this exit mechanism, then of course you are in vicious cycle. Because you cannot push voters to agree with these rules. It is legitimate that voters and politicians can say, okay, there are some rules, we are members, but we don't agree, and we are telling you we will not fulfill, we will not respect. It is possible, it happened in Greece, but it has to be clear for everybody that yes, it is possible, but then it will be necessary to leave Eurozone. Without this, we have the current situation which is perverse, which is abnormal. We have new government in Greece which said openly, explicitly, but maybe even more implicitly, that they will not fulfill rules of game, but at the same time, 75% of Greeks wants to stay in the Eurozone. Which means many significant part of the voters of Tsipras voted for him because he promised not to respect these rules, but at the same time they want to stay in the Eurozone. They don't want to leave. And this is paradox and perverse situation also because we don't have these rules for exit. Without having these exit rules, not only for the voluntary exit, but also for the enforced exit, until that time it will be impossible to solve the situation. Which means, let me conclude that, in my opinion, these are the most important lessons from the Euro crisis, but not only from the Euro crisis, also from economic policy and for doing reforms. Because what is important, let me conclude by saying this. As I said at the beginning, necessary precondition for monetary union is not to have the same level of economic development, but very important is to have convergence and not divergence process in the competitiveness and in the economic development. And for this, you have to have flexible markets. We still, another problem, we still don't have a single market in Europe. We still don't have. It was the main idea behind this more than 50 years ago. We have monetary union, but we still don't have single market. Which means to finalize single market, to have strong and enforceable automatic rules for fiscal responsibility, for doing necessary structural reforms, for to have flexible markets. This is the only way how to sustain Eurozone and how to have successful monetary union for next decades. Thank you. Okay, now we can discuss, which means floor is yours. Yeah, please.
Good evening. Thank you for the speech. My name is Ciprian Modiș. I come from Romania. So you mentioned that your party, first time, was against the 80 billion loan towards Greece, and then you decided that it's okay and you agree with it. I wonder whether this was or not in the first time the refusal, some sort of political decision instead of economic decision, like political decision against the Fico party.
I'm afraid I didn't understand your question.
So, to rephrase it, I wonder if the refusal of first time of the 80 billion credits wasn't more political tool against Fico, because...
Yeah, of course it was affected also by the time of the election, it was a few weeks before election, but mostly not. Mostly it was because we were really convinced that it is bad. And we still are. I'm convinced. And I tried to explain what was the difference between the first loan and especially the situation in which country was in the first loan and then in EFSF and ESM. Which means, of course, and there are people, Sulik is arguing that we are not consistent. That he is only consistent because he was against. At that time, he's still against and will be forever against. But of course, this is, in my opinion, not consistency, this is stupidity. It is even not respecting reality. Because what kind of, even what he said now, a few months ago, he said, he doesn't regret what he did, he thinks it was good, and he would do it again. What kind of coalition potential has party which is doing this kind of policy, which is voting against its own government? We know where we are living. Of course, we are not saying, and this is the most important. I never said that I'm happy from the ESM and EFSF. I never said that these are good solutions. But unfortunately, we were and we are in the situation where it is no choice between good and bad solution. There is only choice between bad and even worse, and the worst solutions. That's the point. And at that time, and I can, I illustrated, I found my notices when I had speech in this October session of the parliament, which was decisive, and I can illustrate by what I used, how kind of arguments. Because it was not only our opinion, it was that this ESM and EFSF is not the best one, and it was made a lot of mistakes on the Greek government, rating agencies, European Commissions, Eurostat, everybody did a lot of mistakes. Financial market, the banks. But at that time in the crisis, it was not debate about this, who was wrong. It is about what we have to do to stop or to minimize the risk of catastrophe. Which means in this regard, for instance, all media I mean, opinion leaders, media in the economic fields like The Economist, Financial Times, Handelsblatt, others, World Bank, IMF, everybody were united at that time, EFSF, ESM, that it is necessary. It was not clear if it will be sufficient, if it will be enough, but everybody agreed, almost everybody. If you are speaking about political position at that time, only position like Sulik, which means nothing, never had the extremist parties in the Europe. Only Wilders in the Netherlands, only Strache in Austria, and then right Finns, I think, in Finland. Which means really, if you look at this from this point of view, it was really extremist position to reject anything, and to say, no, we want to be there, be part, but we will not participate on anything. Yeah, please.
I'm Mihai Popsho, I come from Moldova. My question is the following. How do you square the circle between moral hazard and solidarity in Europe? Because you yourself said that it's a club, there are benefits and there are costs, and you also said, indeed, that the debt to GDP ratio increased in Greece in the last years, despite some austerity measures, and it's difficult to judge whether those measures were enough or not, but they have put measures in place. And more importantly, if indeed there is an exit mechanism put in place in the future, and Greece goes out or is pushed out, doesn't it open a Pandora's box that may, in the long run, in similar conditions, leave Europe without Portugal, Spain, maybe even Italy? And what does it say about European identity and European future in general?
Yeah, good question. But I think it is clear what is the difference between moral hazard and solidarity. Solidarity is, no moral hazard means that everybody whose behavior is risky will not only gain the profit, but will have to pay also the costs of his risky behavior. It's clear. Which means in this regard, like in Latvia, it was paid by Latvian people, by Latvian government, and by Latvian companies, and by banks who did this irresponsible bubble development before. Solidarity is voluntary decision that I will redistribute the money or sources for these who are needy, who are less happy, who are poorer. And of course, in European Union we have solidarity. We have structural funds are the tool of solidarity, of redistribution. Another argument against the Greek loan and everything what then came was the Lisbon Treaty. Non-bailout principle is the part of Lisbon Treaty, which means if we are speaking also about written rules, by the Greek loan, it was broken. Which means solidarity is important, but if you want to have a really sustainable system, it has to be competitive. We have global competition. We have not only European Union or the Eurozone, we have global competition. Asian countries are growing, their competitiveness is going up. US, after crisis, bubble, and still now is much, much more competitive. Which means, if you want to have really successful system which will survive a long time, it is very, very important to have competitive system. Without moral hazard is destroying competitiveness. It is clear. Also because precedents. So because it was happening once, then of course subjects will calculate, it will repeat it again, and so on and so on. Which means it is for said by another word. It is these figures are very often used by Angela Merkel also. European Union is part of the world which has, if I remember correctly these figures, 7% of global inhabitants. Is producing 25% of global GDP, but the share of European Union on global social spendings are 50%. Simply in the global competition, this type of welfare state system based on too high public expenditures and too high redistribution and too high solidarity, if you want, is unsustainable. It's unsustainable because more reasons. First one is global competition, what I have mentioned. Second one is aging problem. In Europe, the biggest part of the burden, of the expenditure burden, are pensioners, especially because pension systems and healthcare. Demographic prognoses are one of the most exact prognoses because we know, especially in the mortality, we know now almost exactly how many people will live in these countries after 20, 30 years. And these prognoses are very alarming because the share of pensioners will grow significantly. And if we will not do real reforms in pension systems, in healthcare, in welfare system, then these countries will simply go to bankruptcy. Which means solidarity is important, but performance and competitiveness is even more. Because if not, then we will have North Korea is, system which is very distributive. There are no rich, but there are some. I think this is really important that to have this. And if you are speaking about enlargement, it is also important to say we have to understand. Also, people in the Western Europe have to understand that this is a win-win situation. This is not only good for us, like countries like Slovakia. It was very good for us to enter European Union. But thanks to reforms and membership in the EU, we are number one in the world by producing cars per capita now, for instance, in Slovakia. Thanks to these reforms and membership EU, but especially thanks to reforms. But it was not only good for us, it was good for these companies also, for Volkswagen, for Kia, for Peugeot, Citroën. They are doing this win-win. In economy, it is win-win. It was good for Eastern Austria before fail of communism. It was Iron Curtain there. It was very underdeveloped part of Austria. Now, after enlargement, it was huge development there. Also in Slovakia, also in Czech Republic. Which means this is not the gift which they are giving us. This is win-win situation. It's good for us, it's good for them. And solidarity is nice, but we have to have for this. Okay.
Yes, I'm Mikloš from the International Relations Department, and I would like to return to your point when you stated that there can be no United States of Europe without overreaching European identity. But don't you think that the way how you manage the economic crisis, these intergovernmental negotiations in the ECOFIN, Eurogroup, Council of Ministers in general, instead of more involvement of people, in fact deepen the other crisis we have in the European Union, and that is the political crisis. And so in this sense you make a trade-off between solving the economic crisis and solving the political crisis. So maybe you could tell more about this trade-off and whether you thought about that when you decided to solve the economic crisis or proceed towards the solution in this way.
Yeah, this is a very important question, but this is not only about Eurozone, it is not only about European identity, it is about democratic legitimacy. This is not only a problem of the Eurozone countries or European Union countries, this is a problem of any democratic developed country, also because income inequality is increasing, also because quick reduction of the confidence of the people, of the voters to parliament, to democratically elected government, which means this is really, really big problem everywhere. What I think, this is very difficult how to solve it, and parliamentary democracy has this conflict, I mean kind of inherited conflict in the gene. My favorite quotation in this is from Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell is the American economist and novelist. And he said, the first lecture of economics is scarcity. There is no enough sources to satisfy everybody. The first lesson of politics is don't respect first lesson of economics. This is very clever, and unfortunately this is true. And this is why there is conflict in the parliamentary democracy, that politicians, another quotation which is also explaining a little bit further, is from Benjamin Disraeli. Benjamin Disraeli was UK Prime Minister in the 19th century, and he said, what is the difference between politician and statement? Politician and statement. Politician cares about next elections. Statement cares about next generations. This is the problem. These two quotations are very, 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 very good, very clever. Because what is the problem? Political cycle is very, very, very short, 4 years. Politicians usually want to be re-elected and want to be popular, and then don't like and hate unpopular measures. People also hate unpopular measures, and it is normal. Not only in the transition countries. Everywhere in the world, people don't like change. People feel fear from change. It is normal. Because who is interested in more depth about this, the work of Daniel Kahneman, who is his latest book is Thinking Quick, Thinking Slow, Think Slow, Think Quick. He is a psychologist who received and also Nobel Prize winner for economy, because behavioral economics is now very, very popular. And he very clearly also shows why people in their genes it is that they feel fears from the change. Which means we have global competition, we have necessity of doing changes because reforms are changing. At the same time, we have parliamentary democracy in which both people and politicians also are afraid to do reforms, which means changes. And then, if you want really to do changes, the problem of the reforms is that at least at the majority of them, not all of them, but majority of them are bringing at the first period much more costs as a result. Which means that's the reason why these quotations are such, I think, very well explaining what is the problem. And this is behind of what you asked in your question. Which means what we need. We need leadership. We need statesmen, much more statesmen as politicians. We have a lot of politicians, but we have not enough statesmen. Who will do this? Who will do despite of difficulties, despite of political risk. And if I have mentioned the Baltic countries, these were statesmen. They did these severe austerity, draconian if you want, changes, and then they were re-elected. Which means it is not a problem with no chance, because people are more clever maybe, like how politicians think about this. And let me conclude. We were criticized also when we did these reforms. We were criticized that we didn't have consensus or sufficient consensus among people, and we did this severe because our reforms were also labeled like crazy and 19th century capitalism, neoliberal, and so on and so on. And the criticism was that, look, you had tiny majority in the parliament, but many people didn't go to the elections, and which means only, I don't know, maybe 30% of people voted for this program, and you did it despite much more people rejected this. But I don't agree with this. I think if in normal parliamentary elections, majority systems and government has a power with legitimate program which was offered in the election, then despite how presence was in the election, this government has legitimacy and also responsibility to do. Because if not, we can wait forever and we will do nothing. And do nothing is the worst. Look at today's Ukraine. Ukraine started after breakdown of communism at the same economic level like Poland. GDP per capita in Ukraine was the same in 1990 as Poland. Polish GDP per capita now is 4 times higher than Ukraine. Because Ukraine did reforms, many times reforms which were not, people were not happy from them. It was no consensus on them, never full consensus, but they did it. It means this is about responsibility, this is about leadership, this is about politics. Please.
Hello, Mario Turiani, Department of Legal Studies. In the light of what you've said, it seems like in light of the recent development in Greece, there will have to be, of course it is a matter of time, some kind of an exit mechanism from the Eurozone. What is your estimate? What do you project for the future of the Eurozone? Are we going to get some kind of exit mechanism? And if so, how soon? What is the time period that we are probably looking at? Thank you.
My short question could be, I don't know. A little bit longer could be, what will happen in Greece? It will depend on Tsipras. Today, it is the ball is on his side of court. And Financial Times, one day after election, had the title, which was very good, I think, because it will depend if Tsipras will be Lula or Chavez. I don't know if you remember, but Lula was a Brazilian president for 2 terms, 12 years ago. He was first elected, and he won elections with very populist, left-wing and irresponsible rhetoric and campaign, pre-election promises. But then, when he took power, he started to do really good changes and good reforms. And the country increased the economic development level and so on, so on, so on. Chavez, on the contrary, won election with the same or very similar rhetoric, but then unfortunately he really started to implement this rhetoric. And Venezuela is now in one of the most difficult situation in the world, and not only because oil prices, but mainly because the policy of the Chavez and his successor. Which means it will depend. But I think in any case, Tsipras, I don't want to be in his position. Very, very often, I don't want to be in it, because he has 2 positions. First one, to fulfill what he promised, and he will destroy the country. Second one is not to fulfill this, but then, of course, I don't know how his supporters will look at him, because, if you promise and such explicitly, I don't know if you have read this program, but this is simply disaster. In a situation in which Greece now is, to promise these kind of things is simply irresponsible. And if it will be fulfilled, at least part of this country simply will go to the collapse. Because Greece now is dependent on the money from the international financial institutions. The nearest payment will be somewhere in March, then be another in July. It will depend. And more broadly, because many people argue that, yes, but it is very difficult to do. How to do it, this exit? I mean, technically, how to do it? Of course that it is not easy, but I don't think that it is impossible. Czechoslovakia was divided on January 1st, 1993. At that time, the government, which decided about this without referendum, they said, don't worry, people, because majority of people at that time didn't want the dissolution of the country. The problem was that we had such different representations in Slovakia and the Czech Republic that it was simply impossible to hold country together, which means they decided to divide it. But people were afraid, and the majority of people in the both sides of federation were against this. And they said, don't worry, you will even don't recognize, there will be 2 countries, but we will have the same currency. We will sustain Czechoslovak currency. There is no problem. You know how long it took? 6 weeks. After 6 weeks, Czech part, of course, because it was bigger, stronger, decided to divide also currency. It was decided in top secret, because it's very sensitive, of course. Money are very sensitive matter. It was decided. It was divided officially at the beginning of February. Countries were divided from the beginning of the year. In the first or second week of February, it was divided, and nobody knew it. Just on the one Monday, the all notes in Slovakia were with stamp. It was prepared during weekend, and of course, it was connected also with the problems. It was connected with the frauds, with the also criminal problems. But finally, it was done very smoothly, I have to say, and very quickly. Now it is, of course, maybe more difficult because we have much more electronic money and so on and so on. But still, of course, it is possible. The problem of Greece is that Greece, in any case, it has to be defaulted, it seems to be, with 175% debt to GDP. It seems to be unavoidable. And if you can imagine that if there will be exit and return to drachma and steep devaluation, can you imagine that this, because all these debts is euro debt or dollar, but mainly euro. Which means, of course, this is difficult.
So perhaps I can misuse my monopoly as a chair to ask a final question, because I sort of want to bring this discussion to a conclusion. I'm very sorry for this, but we have to sort of conclude around 7 o'clock, and we will also go offline. But before thanking you for being here, I have one final question for you. That you talked about this quite openly during the presentation. Sort of that brings us a bit back to the politics, let's call it the engine room of Eurozone governments, the Eurogroup, because you mentioned the sort of the pressure you faced, because it was not was a position which was obviously controversial, but I also noted with great interest that you sort of were engaged in quite extensive discussions. You mentioned also the private sector involvement as an example. So I was just wondering, as finance minister of not only a country which sort of took a very particular position in the euro crisis management, but also which is a very small country, would you consider yourself as someone who was able actually to influence the debate within this group? So how does it feel like someone from, so in your shoes in this position, being in that group and being sort of forced to interact with all these others? Because as you mentioned in your lecture, I mean, this I think was a central theme in a sense. You came from disagreement to agreement, and at least I sort of gathered from your lecture that you have reservations about how the EFSF and the ESM was done, but I don't see that you regret that sort of decision. It was done, and it seems so. I'm just curious what happened inside this.
Firstly, maybe not from disagreement to agreement, but from disagreement to acceptance, because no other way. But not the same, because we rejected loan, and then we accepted EFSF and ESM, and there were differences which I have mentioned. But your question, it's of course a very interesting question. What is the position of small country? Because in theory, everybody has the same vote. In theory. In reality, of course, and it is normal. It's not complaining on my side. It is normal that bigger, stronger, more influential country has stronger voice. It is clear. It is clear. Even there is changing the position. And the most important is not the size of the country, it's not the number of inhabitants. The most important is economic power. Because if you look at how is developing influence of France and Germany, of course in favor of Germany, and of course mainly because Germany is more stronger, because Germany is more competitive. Which means in this regard, of course, fortunately for us, for Europe, I have to say, the position of Germany were usually much closer to my view and my position of my country at that time also, as position of some southern European countries. Which means I have mentioned that usually there was kind of informal bloc of the countries like Germany, Finland, Netherlands, Estonia, Slovakia, because we share also the common view on the what is necessary. On the also this, I have to say, these moral questions that it is simply impossible. You know, and it is very, very now. You can hear it from IMF, from US, from others. Krugman is the most well-known exponent of the criticism against austerity. I quoted him, what he said about Latvia and so on and so on. But I think it is no other way, at least for small countries. Yes, US has the specific position, because it is the strongest economy in the world and because it has the world reserve currency #1. But small countries like Slovakia, like others, have no other chance like to have really consolidated public finance to do necessary reforms. And in these relations in the EU, it was a good test. It was on one side, I said that bigger countries and stronger countries, stronger is better to say, have more influence. But on the other side, it was good illustration that such small country like Slovakia knew. We were at that time, we were the newest Eurozone country. He said no for Greek loan, and finally it was accepted. Of course, they were not happy from this. But finally they accepted. And then, second, evidence that if you have strong arguments, you can, despite your size and weakness, economic weakness, you can push for changes. Was this distribution key? Distribution key, when I had mentioned for the first time that I want to change distribution key, nobody said anything, but then privately they came to me and they said, we forget for it, this is impossible. But we pushed, then we gained the Estonians as partners, and we created a small group, but figures, I can show you figures, what was our share and what was share of Luxembourg, which simply is the richest country. We paid much, much more. I mean, in relation to economic development of a country. But economic development is also about living of standard and so on and so on. And it's a political issue, of course, which means it was unjust, what this original key. And despite of this, I mean, general consideration that it is impossible, we did it. We pushed it. Because we had very strong rational arguments and figures. Which means I cannot say that it was the behavior of the big and strong was in this regard kind of from above, and they don't listen us. No, I have to say that it is correct, very correct, but it is normal that bigger and stronger countries, stronger mainly, have also more responsibility, and they are paying also a bigger part of the check finally.
Many thanks for this. It was a fantastic lecture and a really interesting discussion. So thanks again for being here tonight. So just to advertise, there will be more lectures. Visit our website at ceur.cu.hu. We will also put this lecture on our video archive, so you can watch it again or recommend it to your friends.